A flight attendant humiliated a black CEO's son mid-flight, but the CEO's response left the entire cabin speechless. A flight attendant knocked the black CEO's handicapped son out of his wheelchair, thinking the humiliation would stay hidden behind boarding chaos. He didn't realize the father watching was a man who could flip entire corporations with a single decision. The moment that wheelchair hit the floor, the airline's fate began to crumble. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true authority rises. Dr. Elias Marven didn't flinch when the words came. "You'll need to check that device," said the flight attendant, his voice flat as concrete. His name tag read Reddik Vale, though the lack of warmth in his tone spoke louder than any stitched name ever could. Elias paused mid-step, one polished dress shoe forward, the other firmly behind, halting the natural rhythm of father and son. Kyran, just 10, looked up from his wheelchair, eyes still glowing with the joy of travel. His gloved hands rested on the controls of his biometric chair, a sleek, matte black model interfaced with a custom capsule glowing faint blue beneath the seat. The capsule blinked in sync with his vitals. Elias had designed it himself. "It's not luggage," Elias replied, keeping his voice measured, even calm. "It's life support integrated, FAA-verified, certified under ADA 717. Reddik didn't budge. He didn't look down, not at Kyran, not at the capsule, not even at the identification badge clipped to the armrest that confirmed federal accessibility clearance. His eyes stayed trained on Elias with a kind of stillness that felt rehearsed. The surrounding gate buzzed with the usual airport white noise, boarding announcements, rolling carry-ons, the soft cough of tired travelers. But between these two men, silence stretched tight. Reddik gave a shrug. Not defensive, not confused, just dismissive. Policies changed. Elias narrowed his eyes, the edges of his jaw tightening. Whose policy? But Reddik had already turned, walking briskly toward the boarding ramp without answering. His shoulder brushed past another agent, who glanced back at Elias with uncertain eyes before turning away. Kyran tilted his head. "Do we do something wrong?" Elias leaned down and placed a hand on his son's shoulder, fingers pressing lightly against the textured sleeve of his flight hoodie. "No, Booty. We followed every step exactly right." He offered a small smile, more armor than comfort. "But sometimes, people expect you to prove you belong, even when you already do." As they wheeled forward to board Steerage Flight 718, Elias felt it in his spine, that quiet thrum he'd learned to trust over years in corporate boardrooms and federal hearings. Instinct. Pattern recognition. Reddik hadn't asked to see credentials, hadn't called for security, hadn't offered assistance. He had already decided. Inside the jet bridge, the fluorescent lighting flickered briefly, casting half-second shadows along the walls. Elias pressed the control on Kyran's chair to dim the capsule output. No need to draw more attention. The capsule responded with a gentle pulse. Beside him, Kyran glanced around nervously as passengers moved past, some slowing when they noticed the chair, others speeding up. The aircraft's interior gleamed sterile and new. Row 2, bulkhead, cleared in advance, with extra floor space marked for Kyran's setup, sat visible just past the front galley. But Reddik Vale stood planted directly in the aisle, arms crossed like a gatekeeper in a black uniform. "These seats are reassigned," he said coldly. Elias stopped short. He removed his phone, pulling up the digital boarding pass, complete with medical and ADA tags. "No, they're not. This seat was confirmed at booking, with airline override codes." Reddik didn't even glance at the screen. "Check the cabin. You can sit anywhere else in the main." Passengers behind them began to pause. A couple exchanged glances. The tone was wrong. Too sharp. Too final. Kyran's face turned up toward his father again, now unsure. "Dad," he said quietly, "why can't we sit?" Elias crouched beside him, lowering himself to eye level with his son, blocking out the murmurs behind them. "We will." When Elias stood again, his voice remained low but firm. "This seat is medically designated. We are authorized under both vertices security and federal passenger rights. You're interfering with a protected class. Reddik exhaled through his nose. I warned you not to block the aisle. Then it happened, swift, jarring, and silent. With a step forward, Reddik moved past Elias and placed his hand sharply on the top rail of Kyran's chair. It wasn't a guiding motion. It was forceful. The wheelchair tilted too fast. Kyran cried out as the entire frame tipped sideways. The biometric capsule struck the edge of the seat divider with a dull crack. The sound of shattering glass filled the cabin as the screen spidered with fractures. The chair collapsed onto its side. Gasps surged from nearby seats. Someone shouted, "Hey!" A phone camera began recording. Elias lunged, arms out, heart pounding, and caught Kyran just before his head hit the floor. The boy clutched at him, shaking, not from injury, but from humiliation. His breathing came in short, ragged bursts. Elias quickly checked the capsule, still blinking, but damaged. Diagnostic lines flickered. Reddik stood above them, unmoved. "Cabin can't be obstructed before takeoff," he said, as if reading a grocery list. "No apology, no urgency, only irritation." Elias rose slowly, keeping one hand on Kyran's shoulder. The plane was silent. Rows of eyes stared. Somewhere behind them, the recording phone stayed raised, capturing it all. The capsule's broken screen blinked twice and went dim. Elias straightened, brushing dust from his cuff. He looked Reddik square in the face, eyes steel. "You've made a mistake no system can bury." His voice was ice. He placed both hands on the armrest of Kyran's overturned chair and stood taller. This flight just became a record. The impact was sudden and brutal. In one swift, careless motion, Reddik Vale's arm struck the side of Kyran's wheelchair. The boy let out a startled cry as the chair twisted on its axis, the wheels catching awkwardly on the narrow floor grooves before slamming down with a hard metallic crash. The sound echoed down the cabin, sharp and jarring, metal against floor, child against chair. The biometric capsule attached to Kyran's side flickered as its screen splintered on impact, lines of static crawling across its interface. Gasps rose from nearby passengers. A phone slipped from someone's hand. A mother in row 4 clutched her child tighter. For a moment, it was as if the entire aircraft had paused mid-breath. Elias didn't think, he moved. Dropping to his knees, he slid beside his son just in time to catch Kyran's head before it hit the armrest of a nearby seat. The boy's body was curled awkwardly, one leg still tangled in the safety rig of the chair, his lips parted in shock. Elias gently pulled him into his arms, eyes scanning quickly for injury, hands checking the soft hum of the biometric capsule. His voice remained quiet, measured. "Breathe with me, Kyran. I've got you." Behind him, Reddik stood still. No apology, no concern, just the same rigid posture and a single, cold remark. "I warned you not to block the aisle." Elias turned slowly, one hand still on his son's shoulder, the other bracing against the floor. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Something ancient, controlled. The kind of fury that doesn't shout. It studies, remembers, and records. "What did you say?" Elias asked, his voice a shade lower than before. Reddik didn't repeat himself. He didn't have to. The moment was already etched into the air. Passengers behind them were now filming. One man whispered, "Did you see that? He knocked the kid over." Another murmured, "That's not protocol. That's abuse." A flight attendant further down the aisle looked away, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. Kyran shifted slightly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes, not from physical pain, but the invisible wound of being treated like an obstacle. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible. "Why can't we sit?" Elias leaned in close, his voice tender against the tremble in his son's words. "We will." He turned his head back toward Reddik, who had now stepped aside but not out of view. The man's arms remained folded, and his face twisted into a mask of self-righteous annoyance. Not fear, not guilt, just the dull confidence of someone who thought he'd get away with it, because men like him usually did. Elias adjusted Kyran's chair, uprighted it carefully, and lifted the biometric capsule. A long diagonal crack ran across the screen, right through the neural interface display. One of the calibration nodes blinked red. It would need replacement. The airflow module remained intact, but the logbook was corrupted. Elias noticed the last recorded ping timestamp, 7:12 and 43 seconds a.m. A second later, the entry flatlined. This was no longer a boarding mishap. It was a system event. Elias slowly rose to his feet, the broken capsule held firmly in one hand. The cabin was silent, waiting. Even the hum of the aircraft systems seemed to hush in anticipation. Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't look for the camera phones now trained on him. He looked at Reddik. Only him. "You've made a mistake no system can bury," Elias said. The words weren't shouted, but they rang louder than any outburst. Elias stepped forward slightly, bringing the cracked capsule between them, like evidence held before a jury. Passengers watched from their seats, hushed, uncertain whether they were witnessing a delay or the beginning of something far bigger. "You think protocols protect you," Elias continued, still calm, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge of finality. "But I built the ones you just violated. It doesn't just give us seats, it gives us federal visibility. Everything you did is already in motion." Reddik shifted for the first time, his arms uncrossing slightly. Elias lowered the capsule. His next words were even softer, but cut sharper than anything that had come before. "This flight just became a record." The crack of the capsule's screen still shimmered under the cabin lights when the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are temporarily delaying departure due to a medical protocol," the captain's voice announced, careful but impersonal. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats. Some whispered, others stared openly at the aisle where Dr. Elias Marven knelt beside his son. Kyran's breath was uneven, his body trembling from shock, his small fingers tightening around the torn strap of his fallen chair. His lower lip quivered, but it wasn't pain that filled his eyes, it was the humiliation. Elias leaned in, brushing a hand across his son's curls, voice calm but weighted with something deeper. "Why'd he do that, Dad?" the boy asked, voice barely audible. Elias exhaled, steadying himself. "Because power without empathy is dangerous," he murmured, locking eyes with him. "But we're going to show him what real strength looks like." Moments later, two paramedics in Navy flight response gear entered the cabin, wheeling a medical assessment kit. They moved quickly and respectfully, but the tension in the aisle thickened with every second. Reddik Vale stood stiffly against the galley wall, arms crossed, face blank, as if daring someone to hold him accountable. He didn't flinch, not even when the paramedics examined Kyran's vitals. Not even when one of them whispered to Elias that the biometric capsule may have suffered a functional disruption. Then came another figure, a man in a ski-reach lanyard with his tie crooked and sweat forming under his collar. "Halton Mar, ski-reach's on-call flight supervisor." He looked like a man who'd been called out of bed and into a fire. He offered a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Marven, I'm Handicapped. I want to personally apologize for the confusion. These situations can be tricky. Is that what you call this?" Elias asked, not rising from beside his son. Mar cleared his throat and attempted diplomacy. "Of course, we're taking this seriously. As a gesture, we'd be happy to arrange a premium hotel stay for the night and cover any—" "I don't need a hotel," Elias interrupted, voice firm. "I want Reddik Vale off this aircraft. Now." Mar hesitated. "We understand your frustration, but Mr. Vale is protected under union provisions. Any removal must be based on formal investigation, so he stays." Elias stood slowly now, his movement measured, but his presence unmistakably dominant. "My son was assaulted. His chair was flipped, his capsule cracked. You're citing procedures." He paused, then added, "You've chosen your side." "I'm not choosing sides," Mar replied, but the words rang hollow. Elias didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply turned to Kyran and helped him back into the partially restored chair, careful not to pressure the damaged stabilizer. Then, with controlled motion, Elias reached into the front pocket of his suit and removed the sleek silver capsule backup drive. It was no bigger than a wristwatch, but it housed more computing power than most city data centers. He pressed his thumb to the biometric pad and watched it pulse green. He whispered a command code. The drive side panel flickered to life. Within seconds, Elias tunneled into Vertice's encrypted command node, bypassed the standard user shell, and accessed a protected vault directory known only to senior executives. He typed slowly, deliberately, naming a new file, Flight 718 Incident, Tier 7 Response. He encrypted it twice. He wasn't going to respond with threats. He was going to respond with architecture. The lead paramedic approached. "Sir, we'll need to escort your son back to the terminal for further observation." Medical regulation. Elias nodded, his hand still on Kyran's shoulder. "We'll go, but understand this isn't retreat. It's reconnaissance." Mar stepped aside as they began to move. The aisle parted reluctantly. Passengers stared in silence, some still filming, some ashamed. A few nodded in quiet support, but no one spoke aloud. Elias glanced back once, just before they reached the front cabin door. Reddik still hadn't moved. His arms were still crossed, but his expression had shifted ever so slightly, an unease settling into his features. Outside, the air was sharp against Elias's skin. A private medical shuttle waited. As the paramedics helped Kyran on board, Elias turned toward the gray silhouette of the aircraft against the early dawn light. He leaned in close to his son's ear and whispered the first vow of the war he had just chosen to start. "They wanted us gone. They just gave me the reason to stay." The footage had already begun spreading by the time Elias Marven reached the terminal lounge. The automatic doors hissed open behind him, but he didn't look back. He was too focused on the shattered biometric capsule that now sat idle beside his son's chair, the screen spiderwebbed, the interface blinking red in erratic pulses. Kyran lay in a cushioned medical recliner nearby, a nurse checking his vitals. The boy was calm but distant, his lips still trembling every few moments, not from pain, but the slow realization of humiliation. Elias sat opposite him, face lit only by the glow of his tablet. His fingers moved with precision, no hesitation. First, he synced the footage captured by passengers. The angles varied, some from phones raised in shock, others from personal travel cams, but they all showed the same event. Reddik Vale's shoulder driving into the side of Kyran's chair, the boy crying out, the capsule striking the floor, the attendant stepping away without remorse. Elias uploaded each clip into a secured Vertice sandbox, applying facial recognition tags to key passengers, aligning boarding pass data, biometric timestamps, and crew ID markers. The process took minutes, not hours. Beside him, a junior security officer from airport services approached cautiously. "Sir, we're reviewing the footage now, and I've already reviewed it," Elias said without looking up. "What I need is timestamp clearance from gate surveillance and biometric logs from row 2. And I need it before you ask permission." The officer hesitated, then nodded and hurried off. Elias's tone wasn't angry. It was clinical, cold, focused like a scalpel. He leaned closer to Kyran. "How are you feeling?" Kyran blinked slowly. "It's not the hurt, Dad. I didn't know I could feel that small." Elias exhaled, gently placing his hand on Kyran's. "They made a mistake thinking this was just about us." He looked toward the cracked capsule. "They forgot who designs the systems they hide behind." With the footage now stabilized and encoded, Elias opened the Vertice's comms dashboard and began recording. The room fell silent except for the ambient hum of machinery and the distant calls of boarding announcements. He spoke plainly, his voice controlled and even. "My son was knocked from his wheelchair by a uniformed employee on Skirich Flight 718. He is recovering. But this isn't about one boy. It's about every child made to feel like their presence is an inconvenience." The 90-second statement uploaded instantly. Elias sent it to 4 media partners under embargo. Within 12 minutes, it broke containment. News anchors interrupted programming to play the footage. Social feeds exploded. The video flooded timelines like a siren. The thumbnails alone, Kyran on the ground, the broken capsule, the indifferent crew, triggered a cultural alarm. Skirich's internal message boards crashed within the hour. At Vertice HQ, inbound calls surged. Security flags on Elias's account tripled. Someone attempted to disable his server link remotely. He smiled. Good, he muttered. They're already scared. He rose from his seat just as a silver-haired supervisor in a wrinkled blazer arrived. Halden, Skirich's local ground liaison. His tie was askew, his voice too rehearsed. Dr. Marven, first of all, on behalf of Skirich, I want to extend our deepest stop. Elias's voice didn't rise, but it landed like stone. I don't need your apology. I need your jurisdiction. Mar blinked. I'm not sure then find someone who is. I assure you, we are reviewing the situation. These things are tricky. Protocols, union protections. You think this is a labor issue? Elias stepped forward, standing taller, more composed than Mar expected. You had a man knock my son from a chair that keeps him alive. This isn't a violation of policy. It's a dissection of humanity. Mar swallowed. We can offer accommodations. An upgraded hotel, a later flight. I'm not looking for compensation. Elias tapped the side of the cracked capsule. I'm looking for disruption. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his terminal. There, he sent a private message to an encrypted contact. Kyran Vale, federal transport ethics attorney, former regulatory architect, and one of Elias's most trusted allies in quiet reform efforts. He typed only 5 words, ready to escalate. Flight 718. Vale's response came within seconds. I'll prep capital review. You bring the storm. By then, Elias had already booked a private red-eye to Capital City. Not commercial, not trackable. The conference he was originally scheduled to attend, the Vertices unveiling of their latest predictive algorithm, was officially postponed. Because Elias had something new to present. Something louder. Something built not from code, but from a father's refusal to accept that a wheelchair could be treated like an obstacle. He opened a fresh slate on his tablet and began to write. Project Cradle, Comprehensive Reform and Disability Logistics Enforcement, a defense framework for disabled flyers. As he tapped in the submodules, live biometric seat enforcement, multi-agency incident tracking, capsule override immunity, he paused for a moment. The capsule beside him, still damaged, still flickering, pulsed gently in the low light of the lounge. Kyran was sleeping now, curled slightly to his right, his hand loosely gripping the armrest. There was still pain in him, but there was more purpose in Elias. They thought this would end on the tarmac, he said quietly, eyes fixed on the screen. They've misunderstood the gravity of what they lifted. The chamber lights dimmed. 3 large screens came to life, each playing the same footage in silence. On them, a 10-year-old boy's body lay crumpled beside a toppled wheelchair. The biometric capsule blinked with a cracked screen, its glow pulsing like a wounded heartbeat. The frame paused on the image of a flight attendant turning away. Gasps rippled across the Senate floor. Eyes widened. Some senators leaned forward as if drawn closer by disbelief. Others shook their heads slowly, stunned. The silence that followed was heavy, drawn out, not from lack of words, but from too many of them choking at once. Senator Derek Holst, a tall man with thinning gray hair and a reputation for blunt ethics reform, stood and addressed the room. We are not gathered here to witness outrage. We are here to ask how a child, medically cleared and federally protected, was treated as disposable cargo. He turned toward the center podium. Dr. Elias Marven is asked to speak. We've granted that request. Elias rose from the second row. His navy suit was pressed but simple, his expression carved from restraint. He walked to the podium without haste, a subtle tremor in his right hand, the only visible sign of emotion. The room waited. My son, Elias began, voice measured calm, but carrying weight like iron beneath silk, is not a liability to your system. He is a mirror. He paused, allowing the sentence to sink. You can look away from a headline, but not from a child. Murmurs returned. Cameras clicked. Every eye stayed locked on him. Elias gestured slightly to his right. A Vertices technician, seated near the front, tapped a tablet. A new set of slides appeared, diagrams, protocols, data trails. Elias continued. Today, I'm introducing Project Cradle, that stands for Comprehensive Reform and Disability Logistics Enforcement. It's not a plea, it's a policy initiative. one that includes biometric incident tracing and a licensing overhaul for every airline employee tasked with ADA handling. He moved closer to the mic. Let me be clear. What happened to Kyran on Flight 718 was not a personal failure. It was a structural permission slip. Someone decided that his presence was inconvenient. And worse, someone made that decision easy. Holst leaned forward from the dais. "And what do you want, Dr. Marven?" he asked, voice sharp with curiosity, yet tinged with a challenge. Elias didn't blink. "I want the man who knocked my son off his wheelchair off every flight. I want every policy that enabled him recalled and replaced. And I want a federal gate protocol named after my son, so that no child ever has to be seen as an obstacle again." A silence fell once more, this time not from shock, but gravity. Holst tapped his nameplate, turning to the other senators. "Well then," he said, "let's start there." Within the hour, Capitol press briefings were in chaos. Reporters scrambled to push the footage across airwaves. Within 24 hours, 6 major airlines issued public statements suspending their internal security profiling programs. Skirich, under growing scrutiny, announced it was freezing its Tier 7 officer initiative pending external review. The dominoes had begun to fall, but Elias didn't watch the coverage. Back in his hotel room that night, the curtains drawn and the air quiet, he opened his tablet and connected with Kyran over a secured video link. The boy appeared on screen, lying against a pillow, a blanket drawn over his lap. His eyes lit up when he saw his father. "Did they listen?" Kyran asked, voice soft. Elias smiled gently. "They did more than listen," he said. "They remembered. You made them remember what it means to care." Kyran's face relaxed, but his eyes remained thoughtful. "Did you win?" Elias looked out the window before answering, his gaze falling on the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. "Revenge isn't the goal," he said, keeping his voice low but clear. "Justice is, but we'll start with both." The morning light filtered through the high windows of the Vertices Capitol office, casting long, angular shadows across the sleek conference table. Elias Marven entered without pause, his expression unreadable. His charcoal coat still smelled faintly of jet fuel, his shoulders tense from a sleepless night spent beside Kyran in the medical wing. The room was already occupied, legal, compliance, engineering strategy, all waiting, hushed. They could sense it. This wasn't just damage control anymore. Elias set his briefcase on the table with precision and looked toward his lead analyst. "Status on the capsule?" Rundre, a methodical man with graying temples, stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Kyran's vitals are stable, but the interface logs show a 6-second disruption in respiratory calibration. If you hadn't caught him, he didn't finish." The implication was enough. 6 seconds. That close. Elias nodded once, then turned sharply. "Bring me the list of Skirich board members. And I want their algorithmic vendor chain, every subcontractor that touches their biometric infrastructure." No one questioned the order. Within minutes, names and flowcharts lit up the large display wall. The chain stretched like a spiderweb. Legal shells, data handlers, subcontracted firmware developers. Elias's gaze narrowed as one name pulsed on the lower branch. Loris Tech Integrated Systems. He took a step forward, his voice low and clipped. "Loris Tech runs Tier 7 biometric screening." The room stilled. Rin glanced down at the node on his screen. "That would include override permissions for ADA tags, sir." Elias's jaw clenched. "Then that explains everything." He paced once, hand briefly brushing the capsule holster clipped to his side. The one Kyran should have still been wearing, unfractured. "So it wasn't an isolated abuse," he said, eyes locked on the glowing node. "It was protocol, written into the design." His strategy lead, Jalen Core, broke the silence. "You think Reddik Vale acted on instruction?" "I think he acted within the permissions someone handed him," Elias said. "And now they'll learn what happens when you weaponize policy against a child." He turned back to the head of cybersecurity. "Draft a Tier 1 vulnerability bulletin. Classify Loris Tech as profiling override suite as a systemic civil risk." Use that term exactly. There was a murmur of tension. Tier 1 bulletins were reserved for threats on par with national cybersecurity flaws. Issuing one without basis could cause major political blowback. But no one in the room doubted the gravity anymore. Elias added, "Push it to the industry compliance net and blind copy the ethics review board. I want this to land before noon." An hour later, the bulletin was live. Its language was clinical, but the implications seismic. The profiling override suite was flagged for enabling unauthorized biometric downgrades on federally protected passengers. Embedded systems were cited. Case data reference Flight 718. Within 20 minutes, industry groups began forwarding the bulletin. By the top of the hour, Loris Tech's stock price dropped 18%. But Elias wasn't watching markets. He was reviewing metadata packets from biometric chairs across 4 airline systems. Hidden among them was a deeply troubling pattern. Certain passengers, mostly children, the disabled, and minorities, had been tagged with obscure designations like IS Flex or Seat Flow Worn. These weren't safety tags. They were filters. Flags. Flagged biometric passengers, Elias muttered aloud, tapping through a list. Hundreds. They embedded a silent blacklist. His legal counsel, Rovin Delk, approached quietly. This could breach the Civil Aviation Equality Act. No, Elias said firmly. This does breach it, and now it goes public. He authorized a targeted data drop, not to press, not to social media, but to regulatory watchdog groups, civil rights councils, and airline ethics panels. No drama, just irrefutable evidence. The protocols were real. The threat was structural. As the calls began pouring in, industry reporters, government officials, compliance officers, Elias leaned against the edge of the conference table, looking out over the city skyline. Below him, people moved like circuits through the capital streets. They didn't know a war had just started in their name. A quiet one, but it had already drawn blood. Someone behind him asked, "Dr. Marven, are we retaliating?" Elias didn't look back. His voice came soft, but charged with clarity. "We're not retaliating," he said. "We're dismantling the very framework that targeted my son." He pushed away from the window, straightened his jacket, and walked back toward the map of connections. Skirich, Loris Tech, Tier 7, all woven like nerves. If the protocol allowed it, the protocol ends, he declared. The envelope sat on Elias Marven's desk like a toxin sealed in gold. Heavy stock paper, embossed seal of Skirich Incorporated, and a confidential stamp in bright red across its center. It had arrived via private courier, no email trail, no digital signature. Elias didn't touch it. He merely stared, lips pressed in a thin line, his breath even, eyes unreadable. Outside his office window, the city moved unaware, traffic lights blinking against morning haze. Inside, silence clung to the walls. When his chief of staff entered, Elias didn't look up. "Shred that," he said quietly, gesturing toward the envelope. "You're not going to open it?" the staffer asked, almost startled. No, Elias stood, shoulders squared, suit pressed but not stiff. "I know what's inside. A number big enough to make most men quiet, and a contract designed to erase the truth." Moments later, Elias was dialing a number from memory, each beep like a countdown to ignition. It rang once, then again. The voice on the other end answered low, almost reluctant. "I know why you're calling." "Do you?" Elias asked, pacing slowly, hand behind his back. "Tier 7 wasn't built for safety," the voice said. "It was built for preemptive compliance control, mostly targeting low-profile, high-risk profiles. You know the kind. Minorities, disabled kids, anyone who can't fight back without optics." Bramkel hadn't spoken publicly in 2 years. Once a lead systems analyst in Skirich's internal security division, he had vanished after exposing corruption involving biometric surveillance rerouting at regional terminals. Now, in protective seclusion, he rarely answered calls. Elias didn't mince words. "I need you to testify. We have confirmation my son's biometric capsule was tagged as an obstruction. He was on a list." There was a pause. A long one. "It'll cost me," Bram finally said, voice brittle with awareness. Elias didn't hesitate. "It cost my son the floor of a plane." Outside the Vertices office, clouds began to gather. It wasn't raining, but the light had changed, sharpened into something cold. Inside, action was already underway. Elias's legal advisor forwarded the metadata from the capsule interface logs. They showed that override codes were used precisely 12 seconds before Kyran's share was pushed. The protocol trail was clear, undeniable, and horrifying. That night, Bram went public. In a dim-lit studio broadcast through a secure channel, he sat before a dark blue backdrop with a folded document in his hands, an affidavit. He read aloud, line by line. It detailed the internal directive called Aisle Obstruction Override Initiative, launched by Skirich 2 years earlier. Its primary function? To pre-authorize flight attendants to override ADA, seating, and mobility access based on vague efficiency threats tied to biometric identifiers. Bram's hands trembled slightly as he flipped to the second page. Over 200 children with mobility devices were tagged, he said, their names and chair serials logged in a rotation file. Elias Marven was number 137. The fallout was instant. Social feeds erupted. Hashtags surged. News anchors paused mid-broadcast to cut in live. Skirich's crisis team rushed to respond, but they were too late. The documents Bram released included internal emails, time-stamped override authorizations, and a chilling training video slide with a subtitle, Aisle Fluidity Must Override Optics. By the next morning, subpoenas had been issued. Reddik Vale was formally summoned to appear before the Civil Aviation Tribunal. The man who had knocked over a child's wheelchair would now answer under oath. But Elias wasn't celebrating. In the privacy of his strategy room, he stood before a wall-sized interface map, dotted with red indicators, each a case, a child, a name. He spoke only once. "We're not done," he said, his voice like stone beneath water. "The rot is deeper than the face of a man with a badge." The attendant smirked, convinced no one would hold him accountable, unaware that every clause, every contract, and every legal safeguard was already lining up in the CEO's favor. If you believe cruelty under a uniform always folds when strategy meets power, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. Reddik Vale's voice crackled through the secure tribunal feed. I followed protocol. The child's device obstructed the aisle. The override was legal. His tone was flat, rehearsed, mechanical. He sat stiffly between two union representatives, both in dark suits, their expressions unreadable. The tribunal chamber remained silent, the weight of that single justification thickening the air. On the opposite side of a private observation room, Elias Marven sat still, eyes locked on the screen, jaw clenched. A subtle tremor passed through his fingers as they tapped gently on the tablet in his lap, but his face was stone. He wasn't here to react. He was here to dismantle. 3 male tribunal officers sat at the head of the curved bench. The chairperson, a silver-haired man named Loren Veller, adjusted his glasses and addressed the respondent. "Mr. Vale, protocol aside, the footage submitted shows a minor being dislodged from a wheelchair with significant force. Are you denying this action occurred as seen?" Reddik didn't flinch. The wheelchair was in the aisle. The training documentation allows for movement of obstructive devices under subsection 7C. I acted according to what was necessary to ensure boarding continuity. Veller leaned back slightly, brows furrowing. He exchanged a look with the 2 officers beside him, then turned to the panel's ethics officer, Dr. Kyran Doss. "Dr. Doss, please review the motion record." A large screen lit up at the center of the room. It showed the previously submitted footage from Flight 718, Kyran's wheelchair being tilted sideways, the capsule sparking as it hit the floor, the boy's small frame slumped, his father catching a midfall. Audible gasps spread across the viewing gallery. In the monitor room, Elias breathed slowly, remembering every millisecond. He looked over at his legal advisor, Bram Kell, who gave a quiet nod. It was time. Elias tapped the screen of his tablet, uploading a supplemental exhibit into the tribunal's shared case files. A notification blinked across the bench monitors. New media uploaded. Supplemental Exhibit 8C. Post-incident cleanup footage. Vela paused. "Dr. Marven, can you confirm the nature of this footage?" Elias's voice came through a secure audio line. Timestamp surveillance from gate camera post-flight. Audio enhanced, facial verified. I believe the tribunal deserves to see what Mr. Vale does when he believes no one is watching. Vale nodded solemnly. Load it. The screen shifted again. This time, the scene was grainier, clearly airport security footage. Reddik stood near the aircraft door beside another male flight crew member. The area was quiet, save for the hum of cabin cleaning in the background. Then Reddik leaned in, laughing, and motioned with his hands, mocking a wheelchair tumbling over. He rocked his own body sideways, mimicking Kyran's fall in slow motion, then dramatically clutched his chest and fell against the wall, laughing. The other crew member covered his mouth, chuckling nervously. But the damage was done. The mockery was unmistakable. Silence. Cold, stunned silence. The camera cut back to the tribunal bench. Veller's lips parted, but no words came. Dr. Doss removed his glasses slowly. The third officer, Colonel Arvin Tallis, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, visibly disturbed. The room's atmosphere changed, no longer procedural. It was now moral. Mr. Vale, Veller finally said, voice gravelly with restrained disgust. How do you explain this behavior? Reddik looked to his attorney, who was already rising. We request a recess, the man said quickly, his voice tight. We need to consult with our client. Denied, Veller replied without hesitation. The tribunal will now deliberate. The officers leaned into their private comms channel. The whispering of protocol numbers and subsection clauses faded beneath the stillness of the moment. Elias sat motionless, watching every second. There was no pride in his gaze, only focus, precision, memory. After only 3 minutes, Veller turned back to the microphone. By unanimous decision, under Ethics Code 22B and Federal Flight Conduct Regulation 19.4, Reddik Vale is hereby stripped of his active clearance. Effective immediately, he is permanently banned from employment aboard any federal subsidized commercial airline. Furthermore, this tribunal refers his conduct to the Department of Civil Enforcement under grounds of minor endangerment and assault. Reddik said nothing. One of the union representatives placed a hand on his shoulder, perhaps in shock, perhaps in defeat. The feed ended abruptly. Elias stood. He closed the tablet gently, almost ceremonially. The silence in the monitor room seemed to bow to the moment. He didn't smile. There was no victory dance. No celebration. Just breath. Just the distant echo of justice, spoken softly in the walls of a system that had once failed his son. He stepped out into the sunlight beyond the tribunal building, the doors sliding open as reporters surged toward him. Cameras snapped. Microphones stretched forward, questions fired from every direction. He raised one hand to quiet them. His voice was low, but clear, carried not with force, but with finality. A child's dignity is policy. The smear campaign began with a single headline, an anonymous post on a fringe aviation blog, accusing Dr. Elias Marven of fabricating the entire incident aboard Steerage Flight 718. The article claimed the fall had been orchestrated for viral sympathy, and that Elias had used his son Kyran as a pawn for political gain. Within hours, the lie metastasized. Dozens of clickbait sites republished the piece. Social media bots flooded comment sections, questioning Elias's parenting. Then came the deep fake, an eerily convincing video stitched together from past interviews, manipulated to appear as though Elias was admitting to setting up the fall. It spread like wildfire. Kyran saw it on a school tablet before Elias could intervene. The 10-year-old stared at the screen, lips trembling. "Dad," he whispered, "are they saying I faked it?" Elias froze. The boy's question didn't come with anger. It came with heartbreak. Elias dropped to one knee and took his son's hand, pressing it between both of his. The office around them blurred into the background, the buzzing screens, the panicked voices, the war room chatter. It all faded. "No, son," he said firmly. "They're saying they're scared. That means we're close." Vertices security mobilized immediately. Their counter-cyber unit, led by technician Mauren Voss, traced the bot activity and metadata trails from the deepfake to a digital node in Vale, a city known for housing corporate PR outfits. Within 12 hours, the source was identified, a firm operating under the name Ethicom Strategies, subcontracted by Tech Integrated Systems, the same company Elias had exposed just days prior. The link was more than circumstantial. Signed invoices, internal Slack exports, and file hashes confirmed Ethicom had been paid to neutralize narrative threats related to Flight 718. Elias acted swiftly. He convened a private legal team meeting that night, lit only by the amber glow of capsule monitors lining the walls. No shouting. No die. Just methodical precision. Prepare a cyber manipulation complaint, he instructed lead counsel Darren Vale. We'll file in the federal circuit by morning. Include all data trails and tech forensic signatures. Darren raised an eyebrow. That will trigger immediate discovery on all their communications. Elias met his gaze. Good. Let's see who else was watching. The complaint was filed within 48 hours, accompanied by expert affidavits, terminal logs, and metadata chains. The evidence was airtight. Federal authorities moved quickly. By the end of the week, the CEO of Ethicom, a man named Marven was arrested on obstruction and malicious cyber operations. The footage of him being escorted out in cuffs, tie loosened, face blank, made its way across the same news cycles that had peddled the smear. But Elias didn't gloat. When reporters surrounded him for a statement, he declined. Instead, he returned home, where Kyran sat quietly in the living room, holding his repaired biometric capsule. The boy's eyes lifted as his father entered, uncertain. Elias smiled gently and crossed the room. He sat beside his son, opened the capsule, and powered it on. The biometric display flickered, stabilized, and pulsed a soft cobalt glow. This doesn't just protect your lungs, Elias said, placing the capsule in Kyran's lap. His voice was low, steady. It now carries your name in the system. Kyran blinked, surprised. My name? Elias nodded, watching the data signature appear on screen, beneath a new label. Kyran Standard Active. From now on, Elias continued. Every biometric chair tag for flight use will pass through one protocol, the Kyran Standard. He leaned back, exhaling for the first time in days. They gave us a moment, he whispered. We turned it into a monument. The rollout began with a spark, not a speech. 30 days after the tribunal ruling, the Kyran Standard went live, quietly at first, but its reach was immediate. It wasn't just a policy shift. It was an architectural rewrite. Airlines across 3 federal districts updated their systems overnight. The once ignored biometric wheelchair integrations now pinged alerts at every checkpoint. Overrides required dual authorizations. Accessibility seats were digitally locked, impossible to reassign mid-flight without triggering a federal compliance warning. But Elias Marven wasn't satisfied. Paperwork didn't change culture. Code didn't cure contempt. And Kyran's fall hadn't just revealed a broken system. It had exposed a blind industry. He returned to Capital City, this time with his son beside him, not for litigation or hearings, but for creation. Harlan Tech University's East Auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Rows of engineering students, many in wheelchairs or with visible mobility aids, filled the seats. A large banner above the stage read, "Welcome, Dr. Elias Marven and Kyran Marven, toward an inclusive horizon." Kyran rolled onto the stage first, assisted by a student marshal. His chair, sleek and freshly re-outfitted with the updated capsule, whirred softly as he moved. Cameras flashed. The boy looked out at the crowd, not with fear, but with something new, grounded confidence. Elias followed, taking the podium with a quiet authority. Today, he began, we don't talk about lawsuits. We talk about Lift. He introduced Project Skylift, an adaptive tech incubator built for engineers with disabilities, supported by vertices, but driven by the community it aimed to serve. Innovation shouldn't just include the disabled, it should be led by them, Elias said, his voice even but firm. Behind him, a screen displayed blueprints, AI-assisted gate alignment, capsule sync redundancy systems, and biometric comfort mapping seats. But it wasn't Elias who delivered the moment that cracked open the room. It was Kyran. He gripped the microphone with both small hands and leaned forward. "They made me feel small on that flight," he said, his voice soft but clear. "So we're building things that lift people like me higher." The silence that followed was total. Then, as if pulled by an invisible cord, the entire audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered across the auditorium. Some students had tears in their eyes. Elias stepped beside his son and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Today we give something back," he said. "Effective immediately, all royalties from the biometric capsule patent. Every dollar go to fund Skylift. You will no longer need to ask permission to build the future. You'll be the ones authoring it." A tech investor in the front row blinked in disbelief. "He just gave away millions," the man whispered to his colleague. But Elias didn't look like he'd lost anything. He looked like a man who had finally stepped onto the right runway. As the applause softened, Kyran looked up at his father. "Will people still remember what they did to us?" Elias knelt beside him. "They'll remember what we did with it." A drone camera rose quietly above them, capturing the moment, father and son beneath a banner that no longer just welcomed them, but symbolized a change in direction. A boy once knocked to the floor had now risen to become the reason planes would fly safer, smarter, and more human. And as the credits for that day's symposium played on screens across the campus, the final words spoken by Elias echoed into the archive. "What they try to break became what breaks their system," he said. "From insult, we made innovation." The alert came through just after midnight. Elias Marven stood in his private office at Vertices Capital Division, reviewing the final Skylift prototypes when his lead systems analyst, Corin Daves, entered without knocking. His face was pale, laptop in hand. "Sir, you need to see this." Elias turned slowly, the low hum of server cores casting a gentle rhythm behind him. Corin placed the laptop on the conference table and hit play. A press clip began, an internal demo reel from Nextvale Aerospace, quietly released during a closed-door investor pitch. The voiceover was smooth, clinical, introducing SkyClean, a streamlined passenger protocol enhancement suite built for proactive compliance resolution, developed with operational foresight for airborne efficiency. Elias watched the interface flash across the screen. Passenger bioscans, red flashing override buttons. A familiar script architecture. Too familiar. "That's Tier 7, he said, his voice flat. Corin nodded. Repackaged, rebranded, but structurally identical. They even used some of Loris Tech as deprecated code. We triple-checked. And who signed off on the pitch? Corin pulled up the metadata. The name froze Elias in place. Orn Vestal. Former Skirich director. Tier 7's original compliance architect. For a moment, Elias said nothing. He looked out the reinforced window of his office, where the capital skyline flickered in protest banners and construction cranes. Then, as if something inside him snapped into gear, he said, "Get Bram Kell on the line." Within the hour, Bram appeared on screen, gray-bearded, sharper than ever, his voice low and wary. "You're calling about SkyClean," he said, before Elias could even speak. "You've seen it. I helped code part of the Tier 7 testing suite, remember? You could slap a new name on it and paint it blue, but the bones are still rotted." Elias leaned forward. "I'm filing a joint petition with the Federal Aviation Ethics Tribunal. But I need you to back it with internal schema documentation, proof of shared lineage. Will you?" Bram hesitated, fingers steepled. "This could make me unemployable for life." Elias didn't flinch. "A year ago, my son was on the floor of a plane, choking on broken trust. Now, they're trying to bring that floor back. We can't let them." Bram exhaled. "Send the documents." By morning, the petition had been submitted. The language was precise, surgical. Request for emergency audit on passenger override systems exhibiting Tier 7 protocol traits under alternate naming conventions. It included schema lineage maps, code strings, vendor flowcharts, and most damningly, a compiled visual overlay showing SkyClean structure mirrored against Tier 7's shutdown framework. The match was 93.7% identical. The public didn't take long to respond. Once the story broke, news anchors picked up the petition like wildfire. Headlines screamed, "Tier 7 reborn? Disabled passenger protocol repackaged. Same abuse, new name? The Senate convened a hearing within 72 hours. Oren Vestal arrived with his legal team, composed but sweating. Cameras flashed. He raised his hand and swore an oath. Do you confirm that SkyClean is a completely original system, with no lineage to the band Tier 7 framework? A senator asked. Ido, Oren replied. That was the moment Elias's legal strategist, Rindre, slid a USB drive across the table to the clerk. The screen behind the panel came to life. The footage played, an internal NextVale product demo, never meant for public release. In it, Oren spoke to investors on camera. SkyClean was built on the bones of the Tier 7 logic tree. We improved it, made it more elegant, but it works on the same compliant scaffolding. Gasps filled the chamber. Oren paled. You lied under oath, Mr. Vestal, said the chairperson coldly. Your system is not only derivative, it is dangerous. Oren's lawyer tried to interrupt, but was too late. The tribunal called for immediate vote. The results, SkyClean, permanently banned. NextVale Aerospace, fined $240 million, barred from override tech contracts. Oren Vestal, lifetime ban from all FAA-regulated technology proposals. Referral to the Department of Federal Integrity for perjury under oath. The gavel hit like a thunderclap, but Elias wasn't in the chamber to hear it. He stood instead in a glass-paneled lab, surrounded by engineers in adaptive chairs, prosthetic limbs, and biometric goggles. Kyran's capsule was displayed on a pedestal, encased in safety light. The next generation of Skylift was being designed not for profit, but for prevention. We don't just tear down. We build better air, he told his board, because one boy's fall should become a nation's rise. 6 months later, Elias Marven and his son Kyran stood on the tarmac of Velton International, facing the future quietly but powerfully. The morning air was crisp, filled with the low hum of turbines powering up across the runway. Before them loomed a sleek new aircraft, its body a blend of silver and soft cobalt streaks that shimmered under the rising sun. It wasn't just another airplane. This one was the first of its kind, a vessel equipped with a complete Cradle 7 suite, an adaptive aviation system designed from the ground up with accessibility, protection, and dignity in mind, and painted across its fuselage in bold, graceful lettering, the Kyran class. Elias glanced at his son. Kyran was stronger now, his posture firmer, his confidence sharpened by everything he had endured. The boy held a small flag in his right hand, the words "Ready for Sky" emblazoned in bright blue. He wore a navy blazer that matched his father's, the trim lined with a silver pin, Cradle's emblem of inclusive flight. Around them, cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in from behind the rope perimeter, eager for sound bites. But Elias gave none. His eyes weren't on the crowd. They were on the boarding bridge. It was the same kind of bridge where, half a year ago, his son had been humiliated, forced to leave the aircraft after being knocked from his wheelchair by someone paid to protect passengers. That day had changed everything. But today was not about pain. It was about what was built from it. Kyran's fingers tightened slightly around the flagpole. His breathing was steady, but Elias knew what lay beneath. Memories of helplessness, a metallic floors, and shattered dignity. He knelt beside him. You okay, son? Elias asked gently, his voice low, so only Kyran could hear. Kyran nodded once, then said, I remember the sound when I hit the floor, but now I want to remember what it sounds like when the door opens. Elias's throat tightened. He placed a hand on Kyran's shoulder, nodding with quiet pride. Then let's make a new sound worth remembering. Just then, the boarding bridge began to lower smoothly without obstruction. It was fitted with a dual-track lift and capsule rail designed specifically to accommodate chairs like Kyran's. No longer a narrow path demanding compromise. This was a full-width platform built for respect, not exception. From the aircraft's open door, the pilot stepped forward. He was a tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a deep voice that carried across the runway. His name badge read Captain Bram Holter. He saluted, not as a formality, but with sincerity. Permission to welcome you aboard, Kyran Marven, the captain called out, then walked down the ramp himself, and approached the boy directly. Today, you're not just a passenger. You're the reason this aircraft flies the way it should. Kyran blinked, unsure what to say. Elias gently nudged his arm. Thank you, Kyran managed, his voice soft but steady. Captain Holter knelt to eye level. No child in a chair should ever fear the sky again, he said solemnly. Not while I'm flying. Elias took in the moment, the weight of it. There are no bureaucrats here, no boardroom strategists or lawyers arguing policy. Just a boy who had once been made to feel like an inconvenience, and a system now redesigned in his honor. Reporters captured every second, but Elias didn't look at them. Instead, he raised his hand, directing Kyran's chair forward. The motors purred to life, gliding across the reinforced boarding ramp, seamless and soundless. No resistance, no clearance check, no delay. As the cameras clicked in rhythm, Elias stepped behind Kyran and walked slowly. Not in haste, not in retreat, but forward, with the poise of someone who had dismantled something corrupt and rebuilt it with truth. Inside the cabin, flight attendants stood in crisp blue uniforms, not the standard steerage blues, but redesigned attire embroidered with the cradle insignia on their sleeves. They greeted Kyran with respectful nods, each of them having completed the new ethics training module, one that began with footage from Flight 718. Elias turned slightly as he entered, glancing back at the aircraft's name painted just above the cabin door, the Kyran class. A single tear threatened, but he blinked it back. And then, as the hatch slowly closed behind them, Elias placed his hand on his son's shoulder and whispered words not for the cameras, not for applause, but for the boy who had risen when the world tried to flatten him. We didn't ask for this spotlight, but since they gave it to us, we're going to shine it on everyone they tried to ignore. 1 year to the day after the incident on Flight 718, the main courtyard of Northbridge Airport was unusually silent. All aircraft in the vicinity had been rerouted for the hour. No announcements rang over the intercom. No rolling luggage clicked over tile. Instead, a velvet rope surrounded a canvas-covered structure, 6 feet tall, placed on a granite pedestal. Around it, a dense crowd had gathered: journalists, airport staff, airline executives, legislators, travelers from across the country, and most notably, a group of young cadets in navy blue aviation ethics uniforms, each standing in silent formation. Among them was Dr. Elias Marven, dressed simply in a dark gray overcoat, flanked by 2 aides. Beside him, in his upgraded biometric chair, sat 11-year-old Kyran, wearing a tailored jacket with a small gold pin on the lapel, the insignia of Project Skylift. The announcer's voice was solemn. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us as we unveil a symbol not just of remembrance, but of reform. He paused. This moment began with a fall, but it will stand for generations. He stepped back. A soft click signaled the ropes retracting. The canvas was lifted. Beneath it stood a bronze sculpture, detailed, breathtaking. A boy in a wheelchair, the biometric capsule attached to his side, casting a simulated glow beneath sculpted glass. His hand was raised, palm forward, not in fear, but as if halting injustice in its tracks. The plaque below read, "They tried to make him sit back down." He stood up anyway. The crowd stood motionless. The silence was not empty. It was reverent, thick with understanding. Elias took a slow step forward. He didn't clear his throat, didn't look at his notes. His voice, when it came, was steady and raw. "This isn't just for Kyran," he said. "It's for every child ever told they were an inconvenience. This is the record of what happens when love is louder than policy." Several people looked down, blinking quickly. A man in the third row removed his sunglasses. A cadet near the back clutched his ethics manual tighter. Elias didn't linger. He nodded once to the audience, then turned toward Kyran. But Kyran wasn't watching the crowd. His gaze was fixed on the sculpture, on the frozen bronze boy who had been thrown to the floor once and now stood forever. "Is that really me?" he whispered. Elias crouched down beside him, the movement slow, measured. "It's every version of you," he said softly. "The one who got up. The one who didn't ask to fight, but did. The one who made a system rise just by refusing to vanish. A flashbulb went off nearby, but neither of them flinched. Up in the observation mezzanine, cameras recorded from multiple angles. Live feeds were streaming to federal institutions, universities, and airports nationwide. One of those monitors played a training module where the Flight 718 tribunal footage looped for cadets. Reddik Vale's cruel mimicry, the Senate hearing, Elias's words. "They made you fall once," Elias said, voice quiet but filled with unshakable certainty. "But now the whole system stands because of you." Kyran's lips parted into a small smile. His eyes, now dry, shimmered. He looked up at his father, not the CEO, not the public figure, but the man who had never stopped fighting with grace. Then Elias added, almost to himself, eyes scanning the silent rows of uniformed cadets, the reporters holding their breath, the families holding each other close. "Sometimes justice doesn't wear armor. Sometimes it rolls forward quietly and never turns back." Minutes later, the CEO responded with a calm, devastating precision that stunned the entire terminal. Boardrooms shook, contracts dissolved, and the airline faced consequences it never imagined. If you believe real authority protects the innocent and strikes with unshakable force, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores racism, abuse of authority, and the moment justice and integrity confront cruelty. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, accountability, and protecting the vulnerable in every situation.